sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank you.
Hi, welcome. My name is Evan, and you are listening to Left of the Projector. I am joined this week by Farhad to talk about the movie RoboCop, and we will be discussing the unedited version. So if you didn't know, there are two versions, the theatrical and the unrated one. Thank you for joining me, Farhad.
Evan, thank you so much for hosting this podcast. It was a lot of fun to revisit RoboCop after many moons.
Yes, it's as I should have mentioned, it came out in 1987, kind of in the midst of the Reagan era. So there's lots to kind of uncover about it. And for those who've listened to a couple other episodes of this show, we more did a recap of a movie and kind of brought in our thoughts as we go. So the format's going to be a little different this episode, where we're just going to dive into some interesting topics and obviously talking about the plot as we go through it. So the first thing that I thought of when I watched this movie, or an obvious theme throughout everything, is just the over-militarization of both the police and this company, which we'll get into, that owns the police, which is another major topic. But maybe coming in from just that militarization standpoint, I don't know what you thought about how they portray the U.S. military, as there's lots of these video clips from television in the 80s, and it's a lot of conflict abroad and how the U.S. is kind of sticking their imperialist nose into everyone's business. So I don't know what you thought about that and how you played in.
Evan, I just want to kind of double click on your point about there's so much in this movie. There's so many nuances, so many layers. I think Jonathan Swift would have been proud in terms of just the satire Paul Verhoeven and the writers deploy in this movie. Every commercial is like a mini movie in and of itself, another critique of whether it's militarization or globalization. And I came back to that commercial about the game Nukem, the Holocaust World War III politics game. And it's literally, there was a quote is, Pakistan is threatening my borders. And then the father says, that's it, no more no more aid. Juxtapose that with the conversation that Clarence Boddicker, one of the best bad guys in the history of film, was having with Jones, the VP at the corporation, when they were trying to like solve the problem of RoboCop. The point they made about corporations and criminals working together to subvert the rule of law in favor of profits. And then when they were talking about cleaning up RoboCop or getting rid of him, he asked, do you have like military grade weapons? And he said, we practically are the military. So that point was like, like highlighting military criminals working together through corporations, and ultimately to privatize the privatization of the public sector. But it was just that remarkable point of saying we practically are the military, as the bad guy is asking the other bad guy, do you have the weapons I need? So yes, that level of deep scrutiny of corporate bad actors focusing on profits rather than the public good is pretty clear throughout this movie.
It's not subtle in the least throughout the entire movie, and that's the other part that you can add on to. It's a good point about the company saying that they basically are the military and thinking how they can just outfit. It's not any different than you look at Lockheed Martin, these big weapons contractors today. And the other thing too is just the lack of separation between corporate America and just America. As like one preface to the whole plot is that the police in Detroit, where, big booming city in the 80s, even and before, with steel and cars and all of that. And then now their police is owned by a corporation. So they don't even really have their own autonomy anymore. It's just this corporation, which is kind of a good way to look at, the 1980s with Reagan and privatization and this public-private partnership. We
can even go further back. My family's originally from, the subcontinent. And, it was a corporation that ran India for a long, long time. And there was a quote from the movie. Again, I think it was the owner, the old man, as they referred to him in the movie. We said, traditionally, we have gambled in markets that are traditionally nonprofit, hospitals, prison, space exploration. And he goes, I believe good business is where you find it.
I say good business is where you find it.
And that very line is then quoted near the end of the movie by Clarence Boddicker about like good business is where you find it, when we talk about all these workers coming in to build the New Detroit or Delta City, sorry. Even in the structure, like you can see some like management consulting language when he talks about the nefarious regrouping of police officers that are prime candidates for the RoboCop project being sent to a precinct in a high crime area in order to find like a suitable body to become RoboCop. It's a very remarkable point. And then of course, when Clarence Barnacle first comes up across Murphy, he says, are you a good cop? He goes, you must be some kind of great cop. And I was just like, wow, like, there's a lot of nuance here.
What's interesting about that part too of bringing the cops into the more crime-ridden areas and saying like that, they need bodies for the RoboCop program. It's similar to just now and I guess forever the U.S. military. They just need bodies to be in the military to fight whatever war. And that's another thing that's through line through this too, is part of this military aspect is those TV commercials. They have a conflict in Mexico, I believe, is one of the conflicts where the U.S. is backing the rebels against the Mexican government. And I believe there's one in Africa. So throughout the whole movie, they kind of just dig deep into all the military actions and coups that the United States has basically done.
And to your point about the movie opens in like the first few seconds, you see those smiling anchors and they literally say, what is it? Give us 3 minutes and we'll give you the world. And they go from like the smiling faces to like these horrible conflicts that they described.
The threat of nuclear confrontation in South Africa escalated today when the ruling white military government of that besieged city-state unveiled a French-made neutron bomb and affirmed its willingness to use the 3-megaton device as the city's last line of defense.
It's just so prescient about this. And forgive me, I don't want to violate decorum of your podcast.
No.
It super implies, one of my other Paul Verhoeven favorite movies is Starship Troopers, which is, basically a critique of fascism and militarization on a different level, right? Like, and you could see that through line in exactly the point you talked about with respect to not just the commercials, but the newscasts talking about who we're backing here and there. So it was really cool to see, not cool, I think the rest of them, it's just shocking to see how close we are to this future they highlighted.
I know. And what's one thing about it too is part of it is that it takes place in what you probably assume at the time is like a slightly distant future where they can manage crime, get rid of crime, build this Delta City, this new place with millions of jobs. But one thing I was thinking about too with the movie, and this plays into the police part of it. Obviously, RoboCop is a police officer, but kind of a militarized police officer. And they harp on this a few times very early on and throughout the movie, and it's the fact that the police officers are not allowed to strike. So they're privatized. And the thing that I thought of when I heard these lines is it reminded me of the Ronald Reagan traffic controller strike and how they were not allowed to strike in the 1980s. So I wonder if that was, the chief is constantly saying you can't go on strike. Police officers don't go on strike. We have to protect the city. And so and eventually they do end up going on strike towards the end of the film. So really there's like a through line of labor and unions too.
Absolutely. They talk about workers both in terms of folks coming in to build the city, the jobs, the 2 million workers and jobs that will be created, the police pushing and the tensions between management and labor. Even in the precinct leader, when he walks into the locker room, they stop talking about strike. And I believe they in New York State might be one of this. I want to make sure we fact check what I'm about to say. But the police aren't, and firefighters are not allowed to strike by law.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, public good.
I think that's, the public good piece. And then to come back to your point about Reagan, and I want to give credit where credit is due. There's a great article from what's called the Film School Reject. Kieran Fisher wrote about the violent satire of RoboCop. In this article, he lifts up the point that Reagan was prominently represented in this movie by the old man of the corporation, well-intentioned, but kind of asleep at the wheel, and everybody just kind of waiting in the wings to take over and execute their nefarious plan.
The thing that's a good point to talk about is that urban renewal of Delta City. They're trying to build this sort of modern, liberal, neoliberal bastion of greatness, but really what they want to do is push the crime onto the side and the outskirts, gentrify the one area, hire a bunch of cheap labor to build it, and then just kind of say they've done a thing. And that's what we're seeing now in real time.
Absolutely. I think I challenge anyone who's listening to name another movie in the last 50 years that so profoundly and so thoroughly captures some of the ills of our modern society in terms of crime, violence, waste, climate, class issues, everything that you just mentioned. And the bottom line, the guys just really about the importance of just really just wanting to make money.
But yeah, so the thing, you know, obviously we didn't kind of go through the whole plot, but just as maybe a quick general summary through this point is, so you have this cop and they're who gets assigned to, like you said, Murphy, the main character, gets assigned to this sort of rough neighborhood. He ends up trying to go after one of the big kind of kingpins of crime and ends up getting killed in the line of duty. You think he's dead, but of course, you know, at this moment, he's going to become the RoboCop, and his former partner sort of recognizes him. And part of the movie that maybe isn't the same kind of critique of anything, but there is like the awakening of him as being this sentient being to then having consciousness of his former self, where he can remember his own body, and it turns out into a revenge for him to go after the people who killed him. Yeah. I don't know if that necessarily plays into the overall talking, you know, the discussion, but I think it was a good thing to remember about the plot. And then, you know, the culmination is you find out who is, you know, running the strings, and it's, like you said, the main villain of this movie, Dick Jones.
Dick Jones and Clarence Boddicker.
Yes, he is a great villain. You know, I feel like he often plays a villain in movies. I'm thinking of a few other instances, but he does a great job. And, you know, he will kill anyone to get out of his way. And he has his deal with the crime in the city, which is kind of a common theme where you don't get into corruption as much. But obviously at the very top, it's not the cops that are corrupt in this movie. It's actually the corporation who runs it. So I don't know if you would still say that the cops in this movie are corrupt, or if it's that privatization corrupted them.
I think what my take would be that in this movie, the cops are shown as human beings trying to survive in the same, you know, forgive me for using the term that we use a lot these days, but it's, you know, the same kind of late stage capitalism that everyone's just trying to survive and try to do the best they can. There's a code, there's honor, there's a desire to be good. You know, are you a good cop or are you a great cop? There is this kind of like critique also of this kind of toxic masculinity as well, or like the Dirty Harry or the John Wayne types in like a robot saying, you know, dead or alive, you're coming with me kind of thing, which is a line that gets repeated. Dead or alive, you are coming with me. But I think that the police force shown in this movie are shown in a very sympathetic way, especially near the end when they do, you know, call in everyone to kind of destroy RoboCop, and the cops surround him. And there's a long line of police that say, wait, he's one of us, you know, and they try to protect.
Right.
But then people, you know, still executed on the orders and just kind of shoot at him. It was incredibly violent and incredibly sad. And it just shows the power of the systems to just corrupt all of the, even the most well-intentioned public servants got pulled. Hey, I was told to do this, you know, like that kind of,
right.
I was following orders
yes.
trope. But Evan, if you'll indulge me for 1 second, you said something a few minutes ago about him becoming a machine, a robot, and then regaining his cognition, his memories, and then it becomes this revenge fantasy movie. That part, there's this movie where there's part when he recognizes that he was somebody else at one point. He says this line that actually choked me up. I mean, as an 11, 12-year-old, it didn't resonate, but as an adult, he asked about his wife and child. He said Murphy had a wife and child, and his partner says, tells what happens, and he says, "I can feel them, but I can't remember them." That broke me last night when I watched it. I mean, that is the essence of one of the deepest like human struggles. Like what is it truly to be a human being? Is it ability to feel or ability to remember? And can you feel without remembering? I mean, are you disconnected? Like, I mean, that was like this existential moment when he says, "I can feel them, but I can't remember them."
And then I think it's soon after that moment where he then goes to visit. He finds out where they live. And a very interesting scene, too. I don't want to go past what you were saying, but he then goes into his former house, which is now turned into one of these sort of automated homes you kind of think of in like Back to the Future or something.
I thought about
where everything is computerized.
I thought like, you know, how, open houses in COVID must have been like that as well, with like a little screen saying, "Welcome to this house."
Exactly. And so he's then going through the house and he's piecing together memories. And it's not clear if he remembers these things or if they're just showing you a glimpse of like his humanity. They're making him more human because he's murdered so soon in the movie that he doesn't really have a personality. And so I think they did a good job giving him one here because the characters of his family are never in the film, which I think makes sense. I think it served better this way with just like the people in the memories. But I think that too, the thing I was thinking about too in terms of the RoboCop and then also the automated home is just the general idea of like automation of things. Just, you think of part of what led to the downfall of real Detroit in, real society is automation of things. And so I think the filmmaker did a great job in showing how that was also going to be the future, but they don't really rectify or show what will happen to all the regular people. Who's going to be able to afford these fancy Delta homes when they're working these seemingly pretty menial jobs?
Yeah, didn't Dick Jones say you're gonna have 2 million workers living in trailers, which means crime, gambling, prostitution, drugs, and I mean that's just letting you know where the workers were gonna live versus where the gentrifiers who will occupy Delta City. That line alone about the trailers and the workers took me to just a thought about what recently happened with the building of the World Cup stadium in the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, and so many workers being bought in from South Asia and just exploited and forced to work in 120-degree conditions. So a lot of labor, to your point, rights come up quite directly. And then connected to that, to your point about automation, let's not talk about a silent star in this movie. Ed 209, the stop motion, it's still, I watched it last night. I'm a 46-year-old man. It scared me still. It was still kind of like stop motion. And when Dick Jones talks about, you messed it up for me, man, Ed 209 was going to be, it doesn't matter if it didn't work. Think about the parts, think about the militarization. And he had a whole business plan around like getting Ed 209 to be, the future soldier and all the money they would make on just servicing and repairs and replacement.
And what's even amazing about that is a perfect thing I was going to mention was, so you say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if he works, they'll just use him in the military. And one of the things we know from the real Reagan era was Star Wars program, space lasers. And they mention right after this scene, they go to one of those videos where there's a forest fire because of an accidental shot from a space laser in like South America that kills 2 former presidents. And they just kind of like go by that like, oh, yep, a couple presidents died because our accidental military failures. And so they don't care if the things work. Someone just has to profit off it. And that's the end of the story.
And Evan, did you notice, and this is Paul Verhoeven at his best in so many ways, that there was a news clip, I don't know, before or after, where they showed, there was a little, kerfuffle on the International Space Station. Star Wars was mentioned again, where the president and their team, they lost power for a moment and they had 0G. So it was like a lighthearted moment. But that same device was then, to your point, talked about accidentally creating a forest fire that killed two other presidents. So he did a really good job tying a through line between Star Wars, regime change, and our political realities, or the political realities shown in that movie.
And this actually reminds me of what he did in Starship Troopers. There's constantly the news clips. That's a really big thing. He loves using that. Yes. He loves using that idea because I've read the book Starship Troopers from the 50s, Heinlein, and it's a good book, but I think the movie really makes it into like a parody, whereas I don't think that was the point of the book. Even though this is like this big mega modern city, it still has the elements of that corporate, I don't want to say takeover, but corporate footprint where, they are the ones pulling all the strings. They're making all the decisions. They don't even really mention the mayor very much. I think there's kind of a couple passing notes of the mayor, but it really doesn't matter. You have this gigantic skyscraper where the company, what is it called? OCP is the name of the corporation. They run the city. there is no
The only time you see the
government
government
at
is
all.
when that city council took hostages and was going to execute the mayor. This is one of the scenes where RoboCop is celebrated,
Yes.
and the guy literally said, when my demands are, I want a chopper, I want this and that, and I want a recount, and I don't care what happens, I want my old job back. I mean, who does that sound like, right? Like, can you find me 11,000 votes? That's all I need.
Yes.
I mean, this man is predicting the future in 1987 with respect to what happened in our country in the last couple of years with, like, I don't care what the recount shows. I just want my job back. Literally holding the mayor hostage after murdering someone, again, not to make light of the violent insurrection we experienced, but the parallels are just unassailably there.
So during that hostage situation, one of the things he requests, and I think this is another piece to, yes. I feel like just neoliberal, the car. Yes, the car. And so you have what I saw the cars as a stand-in for, just as, yes, materialism, just the fact that you need these things. And if you have this thing, now you're part of the elite. You want something that makes you look better than the schlubs that are living in the tents and the trailers building the city. You have to be. It's such a fundamentally
sad story of just losing one's humanity to just rampant capitalism in many ways. It's just, you're absolutely right. Something 6,000 is the car, and it plays very. It's a character in many ways. To your point.
Yeah, the name of the car is the 6,000 SUX. It actually leads me to one of the other things I was thinking about, that they constantly are talking about the Delta City. And I feel like it's a big play towards just like economic anxiety, and that this new fancy city will fix the problems. And then you'll just have the RoboCops or the other, machines just out there just murdering all the riffraff that they don't want. And everyone will just kind of live in their glass houses and just kind of forget about what's out there. And, they say we'll create jobs for the people who need to serve us, but that's it. There's no systematic change, just like any neoliberal fix. It's just window dressing and putting a little bow on a pile of
what's
crap.
His name? Is it Michael Douglas from Wall Street? When he says greed is good, right? And I think obviously, like, I haven't seen this in a long, long time, but I think the point was that greed is useful in many ways to get things done and grow and create opportunities in some ways. And fundamentally, I don't disagree with the point that greed is a useful catalyst to get you things and create things, but it's also a very myopic way to look at actually how we think about what can create sustainable change. To your point about window dressing and neoliberalism, they're basically saying, yeah, greed is good. It'll get you all these things. Who cares about the long-term impact? And it like flashed me to a corollary here about, like, our use of like industrial level fertilizers over the last, maybe 50 to 100 years, which definitely increase yield of agriculture, but the long-term cost is like, soil degradation, inability to sequester carbon into the soil. And it's so great in the short term, but long term is going to destroy your topsoil and unable to entire ecosystems are going to collapse. So everything is, this movie is really ultimately on some levels like a call to action about balance, right? Like, if you have an extreme on this side of the equation, one way to balance it is with an extreme on the other side of the equation as well. Yes, you have high crime. Let's build a new city and build robots to murder all the bad people, right? Like, that's, oh, look, we fixed the problem. We put a bow on it, to your point.
Yeah, and I just saw a news story. I cannot remember what city. I think it's Atlanta, where they want to tear down or raise this black neighborhood in Forest to build a new police training facility. Is it Atlanta? Yeah, so I feel like that's like a perfect encapsulation. I think they also talk about in RoboCop building a new police center as part of the new Delta City, because you notice that the police facility is kind of crummy. Well, these guys are living in this. Actually, that reminds me, maybe it's not the best point, but the scene where they go to the corporate bathroom is one of the funniest scenes in the movie, where you have this same idea, like the people who are living at the top, they don't care what happens below, just as long as the thing gets built and another zero is on there.
I don't think this is an
bank account.
anti-police movie. I think this is a movie about class struggle, and the cops are very much shown, the human cops in that crappy precinct in Detroit are shown in a sympathetic way, both from the union perspective of the fact that so many of them are dying. Literally, in one of the opening scenes when they're talking about, they're worried about one of their comrades. The captain comes in and he takes that really, the name tag off of the locker, puts in a shoebox, and says, "Hey, if you would like to make a donation, talk to such and such." And it's like you can see that these people are just as deprived of access to resources as anyone else in this movie. And I really appreciated that nuance. That it's not it's not the cops versus everyone else. It's really, to your point, those who have all of the resources and are controlling and pulling the strings, manipulating and taking advantage of everyone, cops included.
Yep, that's exactly right. And one thing I wanted to come back to is you were talking about the soil and the yes, we improve things, but what is the cost of those? And one of the things that I thought was very funny, this is in one of the very last scenes of the movie, when the kind of the criminal element is trying to go and kill RoboCop so they can get rid of him and not have the chance of losing their status and their money and all that. And it's a scene where one of the bad guys is chasing them and runs through this toxic bin, and it falls all over him, and he basically is instantly mutated into this just hideous, toxic, of toxic Avenger or whatever. And what I thought about when I saw that scene is the area is like in a rundown industrial park, which you probably go to Detroit now, you'd see a place just like that. And the idea that these corporations were basically allowed to do whatever they want, they would dump whatever they wanted. There was things were being deregulated in the 80s, under Ronald Reagan, and, obviously not just him, it's been going on since him, but it does show just the fact that you have this, they talk about the, Delta City, but then there's this runoff literally of these old Detroit where it's just toxic dumps and empty factories.
To go back to the Newcomb commercial, the last sentence there is, "Get them before they get you." The kind of dog eat dog kind of everyone throws up. And there's a moment, and I think it's a news clip, when they're talking about what's going on in the city. And it was totally like this, pothead type character who says the line, "Hey man, it's a free society, except nothing is free. It's the law of the jungle. You're on your own." And I was like, man, that's right there. That's one of the salient points. Very on the nose.
Very on the nose.
And then you juxtapose that with all the commercials that I think are like footnotes of the overarching satire. And I think the first commercial is about the heart transplant. We got the Yamaha, the cops, and whatever. And he goes, "And remember, we care." And it's like, oh my God, it's like they could have made that commercial today.
Right. No, the first thing I thought of when I saw that was, beyond profit. Like, oh, you need a new heart and you have enough money, we'll get you one. And it'll be one of those cops that died at the station that we don't need anymore. So it's, the giving the wealthy the things that actually, it's more like the poor and middle class are basically giving up themselves, their livelihood, their parts for the collective good,
the privatization of the public sector, so that they can make as much money as possible. It is a deeply human story. I will, when you talked about the toxic sludge, that was one of the things that, again, like I said, I watched this movie when I was 12 years old back in 98, and it came out in 87. And that scene definitely stayed with me, scarred me in many ways, because this man was like the desperation of this man, like he's melting, he's dying, he's just been, and he's the bad guy, he's clearly one of the bad guys, and he runs up to he's like, "Help me, man, help me." And it's like, "Get away from me," and shoves him. It just showed ultimately, you're on your own, as the pothead said. It's a free society, except nothing is free. It's the law of the jungle. Yes. And that's, again, shown. If you'll indulge me, I want to make a little bit of a pivot, Evan, and just kind of I do think there is also a subtle theme, or maybe not so subtle theme of toxic masculinity. In this case, literally, this man, gets, doused with toxic sludge, and that's the only time, ironically, he's able to say, "Help me," right? Ask for help. But even RoboCop, and every male character, I think, is toxic in some ways. It just kind of shows yelling, fighting,
yelling
violent,
all the time.
very, very like black and white about things, and the corporate, like the bathroom scene. Again, it's the alphas versus the betas. Like, it's all on display, and it's this kind of a very, I feel, an important critique of the way men were raised in our society. And again, and I think you can see that RoboCop being like John Wayne spinning the gun and just being about the law. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of add that one point, if you would indulge it.
Yeah, no, and it actually made me think of one of the early scenes in the movie where you have them unveil the original RoboCop, the one they want to use. They have the character who ends up dying, who's sort of like the go-getter who pushes the guy who actually invents the actual RoboCop program. He wants to go up against Dick Jones, and he loses because he's cutthroat,
Exactly.
but not enough. So that is a good point. And the other thing about this movie, if there was a critique or this is an intentional piece that was kind of left out, is you don't ever really. There are both, white and black characters, but I feel like race in this movie is a very untold story. It's just, I don't want to call it like post-racism, because there isn't such a thing really. But I feel like in the way that maybe he's critiquing society, he's kind of like leaving the idea of race out of the movie. Because the chief is black and you have other black characters.
That hold him hostage is black. Evan, you're right. And if you think, and as I was watching it now, many, many moons later, Clarence Boddicker's gang is pretty diverse. He has, I think there's an Asian gang member, a black gang member, and then, and a couple of white dudes. And you see there is a little bit more representation than I would have expected from a movie from that, from 30, 40 years ago in it. But yes, I think you're right. I don't think he's, and I don't know, I haven't read enough about Paul Verhoeven's, race consciousness in movies to know that. But there's definitely an element where he attempted something here. What it is, I don't know. But you flagged a really important point.
Maybe in a sense that, sometimes there are movies obviously where race is more pushed, that button is pushed more. Maybe I'm just guessing that the points about neoliberalism, capitalism, corporatization, all of those really middle class versus the bourgeoisie, whatever. But maybe he was leaning more on the class, as you mentioned earlier, class issues, neoliberalism, than he was on, race. And it maybe would have taken away from it. It would be interesting to see. I know there's a new RoboCop movie that came out about 6 years ago, which wasn't nearly as good as the original.
No.
But it would be interesting if I hope no one remakes the original, but if you did, similar vein, if they would touch
I hope
that
so.
topic more.
I don't think RoboCop is a movie that needed to be remade. It's as perfect. Yeah, of course, the graphics and some of that. But, you had earlier asked about, what held up. Does this movie hold up? It completely holds up. And to your point, if they had been even more intentional about the race consciousness or lack thereof in American society then and now, that would have been profoundly useful. But with forgiveness to the folks who made the movie, I don't know if they would have gotten that one right.
a lot of movies from that era definitely did not get that right, but they did have a diverse cast, which isn't always the case, like you said, in those era movies. So I think
Correct.
they
The
did
mayor was black.
a good job.
The police captain is black. His partner is a woman. There's definitely some intentionality there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we've kind of covered the in parts the plot of the movie, but at the end of the movie, RoboCop lives. He's doesn't succumb to the the crime element, and Dick Jones is also meets his end as well from the old man fires him, which is one interesting piece, is that Dick Jones can't die in the movie by RoboCop because he's his boss. Like, you can't kill your boss. So he fires him, and then immediately he's able to then kill him.
Well, which is also, I mean, again, I don't know if we're looking too deeply here, but like he had the three directives, right? What was protect the innocent, uphold the law, something about the public good, and then the fourth directive, which is secret, which is you can't harm an employee of OCP, which just shows you like maybe that was a commentary on like the protections that corporations get that they really haven't earned. And then if you juxtapose that with what he says to his partner when she gets shot, she's like, I think she says like, Murphy, I'm not doing so good here, and he says they'll fix you. And then his second line, which is almost a throwaway line, was they fix everything. And I'm like, wait, is he saying, if is that a line about corruption that the fix is in, like that? And I was like, maybe, I found that, because it's a throwaway line, but he says it, right? He says, they'll fix you. They fix everything.
So they do believe, I don't know if, because obviously the directives are built by the corporation. It's not like the cops idea, but you kind of see that as a similar thing, is you want the public to believe that you're actually helping. And when RoboCop initially is unleashed, all the people he's saving, everyone is like, cheering and pleased and happy that he's doing this.
This hyper violence.
Yes, he comes in I think the very first scene you see is he saves a mom and pop store from robbery. He saves a woman from getting abused, and then the third one is later one of the people he's going after. A really great scene is in the gas station is a fun scene. And actually, one thing we didn't talk about, and I don't know if this isn't really a theme, but the criminal says to the attendant at the gas station, he's working at a gas station, and he's studying geometry, I believe, and he says college,
geometry,
and he calls him college boy.
Yes.
So the other thing that isn't mentioned, I think, other than that line, is the idea of education in this. So he's working at a gas station, and he's studying potentially to get out of that system, where he's, presumably working for minimum wage at a gas station. So I don't know that it plays too much in the movie, but education definitely, I wrote that down. I thought it was interesting.
Absolutely. I agree. That was pretty interesting because it's that same character that robs the gas station. It's the same guy as the first guy RoboCop comes across, and he uses that line, "Dead or alive, you're coming with me." And in that very scene, he realizes, "We killed you, man. We killed you." But when he's talking to the gas station attendant, who's a college student studying, and he gets totally like insecure about this fact. You think basically you think you're better than me. You think you're smart. You're smart enough to outrun a bullet. Like he's like mocking his academic pursuit, so to speak. Like this is kind of like attack on this person trying to better themselves through education, and it's in it. It's in the movie. It's an important moment, and I think there is something to be said about not just the role of education, but the role of class and education. That education by itself isn't alone a great a social equalizer. You need more than that. I think is really what the strings are pulling in. And then of course just the kind of mean, toxic bullying piece is this is the same dude at the end, after being doused by toxic sludge, is begging for help. But yeah, that's a really, I'm glad you.
It's and then I think you also see again in the 80s is when you saw a lot of privatization of education starting to. So the idea that the people who are going to be able to go to college in Delta City are going to be the wealthy, and the people doing everything else, maybe they'll go to trade school or something. They're not gonna exactly. Get the proper education. But as far as the maybe any final impressions or last closing thoughts you had about the movie in general.
The first thing we talked about, Paula Verhoeven and the other folks who made this movie predicted and warned us about our current realities. If you'll indulge me, I watched this movie maybe a year or two after my family moved to the States. I think I was 12, watched it with my dad. Again, shockingly violent. So many things scared me. Again, we talked about the man melting from the toxic sludge or when they initially shot Officer Murphy, one of the most violent scenes I've ever witnessed. It was painful. But ultimately, it's a sad story of just losing our humanity in an artificial society that's just designed to make people money. And I just want to come back and say, folks, challenge is issued. Please name another movie in the last 50 years that is so profoundly and so thoroughly captures the ills of our modern society in terms of crime, violence, waste, and just othering each other and not being collaborative, cooperative, and just trying to make money. It's the law of the jungle. You're on your own.
Yeah, no, well said. And there really is. And what's interesting, I commented to someone about this, about, the first of all, movie that was that poignant at the time. But I think there are a lot of people who might see this movie then and now and just say, oh, it's a cool action movie about cops, without like this, without uncovering there. Like, some movies are subtle in their way of delivering, a message. This movie is not subtle, and to the point where they're really just, he's really throwing it in your face, but not in a way that I think detracts. It actually almost makes it. It's just yeah.
No, it's a satire. it's Kieran Fisher, like, to quote from film school rejects: corrupt politics, violence, unchecked capitalism, economic decline, gentrification, media influence, and the militarization of the police force. The movie is a melting pot of upsetting social political commentary, in addition to being an entertaining sci-fi action romp. I think that is, if I can quote somebody else on your podcast on that, I think that really is to your point.
You can't.
What this.
Yeah, I opened that article, which I'll link, and the one thing I saw when I was just scanning this article was, we brought up Nukem the game, and in the article it says, it's tame compared to modern video games. And the Daily News, I'm kind of quoting, Daily News reports show us cops looking like they're about to go to war. It's not, there's no subtleness to it. And because it was so profound in predicting the future, that things are just, it makes that movie seem just tame, the whole thing. It's just a masterclass. I wanted to thank you again, Farhad, for joining me here on Left of the Projector. You can check out the episodes on your podcast platform of choice. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for hosting this and for inviting me on the podcast.